He had everything, or so the world believed. A towering office of glass and steel overlooking the city that never slept. A fortune that could bend laws, move governments, and silence doubters. Invitations to events that glittered with wealth, influence, and prestige. But none of it mattered. Not truly. Beneath the designer suits and polished shoes, Marcus Kane carried a hollow, a quiet ache shaped by a childhood he had never fully escaped. By a teacher who had believed in him when no one else would. Marcus Kane, CEO, millionaire, titan of industry. A man whose life was a carefully constructed monument to success. And yet, tonight, walking through the rain-slick streets, he felt like a ghost drifting in a city that moved too fast to notice him. His mind wandered, as it often did in these rare moments of solitude, to a small classroom from decades ago. A room lined with peeling chalkboards, the faint smell of erasers and dust, the laughter and whispers of children trying to find their place. And at the front of that room, a man who had never raised his voice, yet demanded respect. A man whose eyes could see not just a student, but a soul waiting to be nurtured. Mr. Ellison. He had been more than a teacher. He had been a guide, a quiet guardian of hope in a world that often seemed indifferent. When classmates mocked Marcus for the color of his skin, for the way his clothes didn't match, for the dreams that seemed too big for a boy from a neighborhood that had no room for ambition, Mr. Ellison had stood by him, encouraged him, told him to believe in himself, even when belief was a scarce commodity. And now, decades later, as Marcus walked through the neon-lit streets, the memory of Mr. Ellison was not enough. There was a gnawing sense that something was unfinished, that a debt existed he could not repay with money alone. The rain fell harder, turning the streets into mirrors reflecting the city's restless pulse. Lights from signs and passing cars shimmered against puddles. The hum of life-honking taxis, hurried footsteps, the distant wail of sirens blended into a murmur, almost fading under the pounding of Marcus's own heartbeat. And then he saw him, sitting on a torn cardboard box near a corner convenience store, wrapped in a coat so thin it seemed barely able to hold the chill, was the unmistakable figure of his old teacher. Marcus stopped dead, the world around him slipping into slow motion. The man's face was a map of hardship, deep lines etched across his forehead and around his eyes, hands calloused and weathered, eyes dulled by years of struggle, yet somehow still carrying that quiet dignity Marcus remembered. Recognition dawned slowly, painfully, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Mr. Ellison?" Marcus's voice caught, a mixture of hope, disbelief, and shame. The old man looked up, his eyes squinting through the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. For a heartbeat, he seemed unsure, almost afraid. And then recognition sparked. Marcus Kane? His voice was frail, yet it carried the weight of decades. Marcus approached, each step heavy with emotion. Memories rushed forward, unbidden. He remembered the classroom, the scratch of chalk on blackboard, the smell of old books, the quiet laughter shared between a boy and the man who saw him when the world did not. He remembered the small victories, the whispered encouragements, the rare, gentle smiles that had made him believe he could be more than the circumstances he had been born into. And now, standing in the rain-soaked streets, Marcus felt the bitter taste of guilt. How could life have led Mr. Ellison here, to the margins of society, while he had risen to the heights of the world? How could he have been so blind, so caught up in ambition, that he had allowed the man who had shaped him to vanish into the cracks of a city that no longer noticed anyone but itself? The old man's lips trembled. Life didn't make it easy for me," he whispered. Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, anything that could undo the years of struggle, the nights spent hungry and cold, the invisible battles that had left their mark. But words failed him. Instead, he reached out, hesitant, hand hovering over Mr. Ellison's weathered fingers, a fragile connection heavier than any weight he had ever lifted in his life. I want to help you," Marcus said, his voice low, almost a prayer. The old man's eyes glistened. For a moment, pride battled shame, and Marcus saw a flicker of the man who had once stood in front of a classroom, confident and unwavering. Then, slowly, he nodded, as though accepting a lifeline he had long stopped hoping for. And in that moment, Marcus knew This was no longer about money, about power, about accolades. It was about redemption, about honoring the man who had shaped him, about facing the harsh truth that life had been cruel to someone who had given so much without ever asking for anything in return. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets in silver and shadow. Marcus and Mr. Ellison stood together, two figures caught between past and present, between success and struggle, between guilt and hope. And for the first time in decades, Marcus felt the stirrings of a journey that would change both of their lives, a journey through pain, healing, forgiveness, and the unspoken truths of a world that had never been fair. Marcus couldn't sleep that night, not in his penthouse lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, not in the room where city lights shimmered like scattered jewels across the skyline. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the image of Mr. Ellison huddled on the streets. A man who had once been the architect of his hope, now reduced to survival in the shadows. He replayed every memory he had of the old classroom. The way Mr. Ellison's voice had always carried authority without cruelty. The way he had lingered after school, offering guidance to students who felt invisible. The way he had believed in Marcus even when no one else did. And now, Marcus felt the crushing weight of guilt, the knowledge that life had not been fair, that his success had been built on ambition, while his mentor had been left behind. By morning, Marcus was restless. He moved through the motions of his routine mechanically, meetings, calls, schedules, but his mind was elsewhere. Every deal, every handshake, every polished smile felt meaningless. There was only one thing he needed to do: find a way to bring Mr. Ellison back from the streets. But even as he plotted, doubt crept in. Could he really help him? Would Mr. Ellison accept it? Pride and stubbornness ran deep, and Marcus had no way of knowing if his mentor would welcome charity or reject it entirely. Still, he started small. First, he needed to locate him. The street corner from the previous night was a harsh, unforgiving landscape, shifting like sand beneath his feet. And yet, after hours of searching, he found him, tucked under a threadbare blanket, eyes staring blankly at the sidewalk. "Mr. Ellison," Marcus said softly, kneeling beside him. "It's me. I want to help." The old man flinched, not from fear, but from a lifetime of distrust. Life had taught him that promises from the world were fragile, fleeting, often broken before they could be fulfilled. He looked at Marcus with cautious eyes. "Why would you care?" he asked, voice rough like gravel, worn from disuse and pain. Marcus swallowed hard. "Because you cared for me once, when no one else did, and I can't just leave you here." Mr. Ellison's gaze softened, but the edge of pride remained. "I've survived this long. I don't need your pity, Marcus. Don't mistake concern for charity." Marcus understood. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering redemption, for both of them. And yet, convincing Mr. Ellison would require more than words. It would require trust and patience, a commodity Marcus wasn't accustomed to wielding in the corporate world. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep into his bones, and continued, "I want you to live with me. There's a place for you, safe, warm, and you won't ever have to sleep on the streets again." Mr. Ellison hesitated. Memories of pride, independence, and years of hardship warred with the recognition that he could no longer survive alone. Finally, he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "All right," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But no conditions, no lectures. I'll come on my own terms." And so, Marcus led him through the streets, the neon lights reflecting in puddles beneath their feet, the city watching silently as two figures moved through its chaos. For Marcus, it felt surreal stepping into a world where money could erase nothing, but compassion could begin to heal everything. The first few days were awkward. Mr. Ellison's routines were foreign to Marcus's life of order and efficiency. He refused help with meals at first, preferring to eat simple, plain foods. He avoided Marcus's expansive library and never touched the sleek furniture. Yet, small gestures began to emerge: a shared cup of coffee in the morning, quiet conversations by the fire, the faint smile that returned when Marcus recounted stories of the old classroom. Marcus watched him, fascinated and humbled. He realized the depth of what Mr. Ellison had given him as a child, not just education, but resilience, patience, and the courage to dream. And now, he saw the fragility of life itself, how easily a man of wisdom and heart could be cast aside by a society that had no room for vulnerability, especially for a black man who had spent decades fighting against systemic neglect. He also felt the gaze of the world pressing in the whispers, the raised eyebrows of colleagues and friends who didn't understand why he had chosen to rescue a homeless man. But Marcus ignored them. This was no longer about reputation. It was about humanity. It was about healing the wounds that success alone could never touch. And in the quiet of those first nights together, Marcus realized something profound. This was not just a journey of charity or duty. It was a journey of reconciliation with the world, with himself, and with the teacher who had once believed in a boy long before he believed in his own worth. Some nights, they would sit together in silence, watching the city glow beneath their window, each lost in their own thoughts. And Marcus began to understand that life's true measure was not in wealth or power, but in the courage to reach back, to lift another, and to confront the parts of society and himself that had failed. In those quiet moments, he made a promise. Not to the world, not to the critics, not to anyone who might judge, but to Mr. Ellison and to the boy he had once been. He would see this through. He would not let life break the man who had once shaped his soul. The journey had begun, and Marcus knew deep down that the path ahead would not be easy. It would test their patience, their hearts, and their understanding of justice. But for the first time in years, he felt alive in a way that no boardroom, no deal, no accolade had ever given him. Because this helping the man who had believed in him when no one else did was the only victory that truly mattered. The first week in Marcus's penthouse was silent, heavy with tension. The walls, lined with modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows, seemed to echo the emptiness that Mr. Ellison carried within him. Marcus had expected gratitude, or at least relief, but instead, he found a man trapped in memories, haunted by decades of loss, pain, and the quiet violence of neglect. It wasn't just homelessness. It was everything the streets had stripped away: dignity, safety, trust, and hope. And Marcus, for all his wealth and power, realized that money could not undo years of hardship. Mr. Ellison avoided mirrors at first, as if he feared the reflection of a man the world had forgotten. He walked slowly through the penthouse, touching objects with care, as though he feared they might shatter at a careless glance. The city outside gleamed like a promise he could not yet believe in a life that seemed alien, foreign, impossible. Marcus watched him silently, heart aching. He remembered the classroom, remembered the small boy he had been, full of dreams, ambition, and fear. And he realized that the teacher he had loved so much had endured far worse than any child could imagine. And yet, the man had survived. Somehow, he had survived. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Marcus sat beside Mr. Ellison on a worn leather chair, breaking the silence that had settled like dust. "Tell me about it," Marcus said gently. "Tell me what happened, why it ended up like this." The old man's eyes, shadowed by fatigue, met his. For a moment, silence stretched between them like a fragile bridge. Then, in a voice low and trembling, he began, I tried to do the right thing. I believed in people, in students, in my community. But the world, it doesn't reward that, Marcus. Not really. It punishes it. And sometimes it just forgets." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. The weight of systemic injustice, of societal neglect, pressed down on him. Mr. Ellison's words were not just a recounting of misfortune. They were a testament to a life lived against odds too great for most to bear. "People," Mr. Ellison continued, voice shaking, "they take what they want and they leave the rest behind. And I thought, if I kept helping, if I kept giving, maybe the world would notice, maybe it would care, but it didn't. And when I lost my home, my friends, my place in the world, it was like disappearing." Marcus reached for his hand, trembling, unsure if words could ever match the magnitude of what he was hearing. "I won't let that happen to you again," he said. "I can't change the past, but I can protect your future. I promise." For the first time in days, Mr. Ellison's shoulders relaxed. He looked at Marcus, a glimmer of the old warmth returning to his eyes. But there was still pain there, still mistrust, still the quiet fear that life could turn cruel again in an instant. Over the next days, Marcus began small, helping Mr. Ellison with meals, reintroducing him to routines he had long forgotten, encouraging him to share stories of his past. At first, the old man was reluctant, recounting only fragments, the students he had guided, the little victories he had celebrated quietly, the injustices he had endured silently. And then came the first real breakthrough, a photograph. Marcus had found a faded picture tucked in Mr. Ellison's wallet, showing a young man in a classroom, smiling at a chalkboard filled with writing. Marcus recognized some of the students. They were now adults, scattered across the world, but the pride in that moment was timeless. Mr. Ellison looked at it and smiled faintly, almost shyly. "We tried," he said. "We really tried." Marcus realized then that the healing wouldn't come quickly, and it wouldn't come easily. It would take patience, trust, and an acknowledgement of pain long buried. And yet, in that fragile smile, he saw hope, the first sign that redemption might be possible, not just for Mr. Ellison, but for himself as well. But the past was not done with him. One afternoon, as Marcus left for a business meeting, he returned to find Mr. Ellison staring out the window, lost in thought, his expression distant and haunted. Marcus approached cautiously. "What is it?" he asked. Mr. Ellison turned slowly, eyes glistening. "Memories," he said softly. "Some are beautiful, some are bitter, and some, I still carry the weight of them, Marcus. I don't know if I ever will let them go." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll carry them together. You don't have to face them alone." And in that moment, Marcus understood something profound. Emotional healing was not a linear path. It wasn't about fixing the past or erasing suffering. It was about presence, acknowledgement, and the courage to face the ghosts that had haunted them both. That night, as rain washed the city streets once more, Marcus and Mr. Ellison sat together quietly, each lost in thought. Outside, the city thrummed with life, indifferent yet alive, a reminder of the world they had survived and the world they were still trying to reclaim. Marcus realized that the road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges, but for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose deeper than any deal or acquisition he had ever achieved. This was a journey of redemption, of connection, of confronting pain with love, and it had only just begun. The world did not forgive easily, nor did it understand the quiet battles fought behind closed doors. Marcus Kane had always been judged by competitors, by investors, by the relentless glare of the media, but nothing had prepared him for the scrutiny that came when he began caring for a man the world had long forgotten. It started subtly, a few whispers in the boardroom, barely audible over the shuffle of papers and the tapping of keyboards. "Why is Kane bringing a homeless man into his life?" Some would murmur, voices steeped in curiosity and judgment. "Is this a PR stunt? Is it some sort of self-serving display of charity?" Marcus ignored them at first. His world had always been one of clarity and control, where results mattered more than opinion. But then came the invitations to dinners and galas, the calls from old friends and colleagues, the carefully worded concerns masked as advice. "You can't let him stay here. People will talk. Are you sure this is safe? This is unusual, Marcus. What does this do for your reputation?" Reputation. The word echoed in Marcus's mind like a hollow drum. He thought about Mr. Ellison, sitting quietly in the penthouse, sharing fragments of his life, bearing scars invisible to the world but impossible to ignore. He realized then that reputation, accolades, even millions of dollars, none of it mattered compared to humanity. He began to see clearly the truth that had always been there, hidden beneath ambition. The world often rewarded the ruthless, ignored the kind, and punished those who dared to care too deeply. One evening, after a particularly trying day of judgment from peers, Marcus returned home to find Mr. Ellison sitting in the dim glow of the living room, staring at a faded photograph. The old man's hands trembled as he held it, an image of a young black boy, full of hope, standing proudly in front of a worn-down school. Marcus approached quietly, unsure if his mentor even wanted to speak. "It's not just about the money, Marcus," Mr. Ellison said softly, without looking up. "It's about survival and about dignity. People like us, people like me, They're often overlooked, forgotten, and when someone remembers, the world is quick to question why. Marcus sat beside him. "I don't care what the world thinks," he said firmly. "You saved me once, and now I get to save you. That's all that matters." Mr. Ellison's eyes met his. There was gratitude there, yes, but also a lifetime of pain. "It's not so simple," he said. "I've learned that kindness is fragile. People take it for granted. They assume weakness where there is strength. They assume charity where there is humanity." Marcus understood painfully that this was a truth he had never fully grasped before. Wealth, influence, power, they could protect him, shield him, even silence critics, but they could not heal the wounds of a lifetime. Those wounds could only be addressed with presence, love, and patience. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He would not let the judgment of others define their path. He would protect Mr. Ellison from society's cruelty, but he would not shield him from the truth of the world. They would face the world together, with courage and integrity. It was during this time that Marcus learned more about the man who had shaped him. One rainy afternoon, as they sorted through Mr. Ellison's meager belongings, the old man opened a small box of letters. Letters from former students, long forgotten, scattered across decades. Some thanked him for guidance, some recounted life victories, and some confessed mistakes made in the absence of his mentorship. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as he listened. "You've touched so many lives," he said. "Why does the world only see the hardship, the failure?" Mr. Ellison shook his head slowly. "Because the world rarely measures impact. It measures visibility, profit, success, but lives, real lives, they often remain invisible. I survive by being invisible, Marcus. But you can shine a light where it is needed." In that moment, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a mantle, not as a CEO, not as a millionaire, but as a human being who had been given the chance to correct an injustice, to honor a life that had shaped his own. And yet, the world was relentless. Invitations to social events now carried thinly veiled judgment. News outlets, always hungry for scandal, began to hint at stories of eccentric billionaires rescuing the homeless, questioning motives, casting shadows over even the purest intentions. Marcus ignored them publicly but felt the sting privately. Through it all, Mr. Ellison remained a quiet anchor. Despite the judgment, despite the whispers, he held on to his dignity. And in doing so, he reminded Marcus that true strength lay not in wealth or reputation, but in resilience, compassion, and the courage to face the world even when it questioned your every move. It was during one of these evenings, as they watched the city lights glimmer like distant stars through the penthouse windows, that Marcus realized the truth. Their journey had only begun. The streets, the judgment, the ghosts of the past, all of it was part of a larger test, and they would face it together. Because some lessons, Marcus knew, were never truly about success. They were about humanity, about forgiveness, about remembering those who had been left behind, and refusing to let the world forget them again. The following days marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter neither Marcus nor Mr. Ellison could have anticipated. It was one thing to rescue a man from the streets. It was quite another to rebuild a lifelong abandoned to hardship and neglect. Marcus knew that wealth alone could not restore dignity. It could provide comfort, yes, but it could not erase decades of struggle, of pride bruised, of trust broken. So, he approached the task with care, humility, and an unwavering resolve. They began small. A morning routine, simple and structured, grounded their days. Marcus prepared breakfast for both of them, insisting that Mr. Ellison eat, while the old man, at first hesitant, gradually accepted. Coffee became a ritual, a bridge between the chaos of the past and the stillness of now. "Sit," Marcus said one morning, placing a cup in front of him. "Eat. You need strength before we do anything else." Mr. Ellison looked down at the steaming cup, the aroma unfamiliar, yet comforting. He sighed a long, weary sigh that carried the weight of years on the street. "I forgot," he admitted quietly, "how normal this feels, how ordinary life can be." Marcus smiled. though it was tinged with sadness. "You're allowed ordinary now. It's not a weakness, it's a right." But rebuilding wasn't just about comfort. It was about confronting the past. Marcus began asking questions not to pry, but to understand, to honor the life that had shaped him. "Tell me about your family," Marcus said one afternoon, as rain streaked the penthouse windows. Mr. Ellison's gaze darkened. "Family," he murmured. "They didn't survive. My parents lost to disease. My sister, she left for the city and never looked back. I've carried the memory of them every day. And sometimes it feels like grief doesn't end, it just waits." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll carry it together. You don't have to bear it alone anymore." In those quiet, shared moments, Marcus began to see more clearly the scope of what Mr. Ellison had endured. The streets were only a symptom of a larger world, a society that had failed to protect its most vulnerable, a system that had overlooked wisdom and dignity in favor of profit and prejudice. But Marcus refused to let the world win. He began using his influence, carefully and deliberately, to restore what had been taken. First, he sought out old contacts from Mr. Ellison's teaching days, schools he had taught at, students he had mentored. Slowly, connections reformed. Letters of appreciation were sent, long-forgotten friendships rekindled, and the faint glimmer of community began to return to the old man's life. One day, a former student arrived unannounced at the penthouse. A middle-aged man with a warm smile. He embraced Mr. Ellison tightly. "You changed my life," he whispered. "I wouldn't be here without you." Mr. Ellison's eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking. I never knew." Marcus watched quietly, realizing that redemption wasn't just about survival, it was about acknowledgement, about repairing the invisible scars that society had ignored for decades. And yet, progress brought resistance. Marcus's colleagues continued to question his choices. Rumors circulated, whispers filled social gatherings, and media outlets painted the story as eccentricity rather than compassion. But Marcus had grown beyond concern for public opinion. Every step forward for Mr. Ellison was a victory too great to be diminished by cynicism or ridicule. He also noticed changes in Mr. Ellison. Confidence, long buried, began to re-emerge. Simple acts: answering the phone, speaking to former students, walking through the city streets without hesitation, marked milestones of resilience regained. Yet, Marcus also saw moments of fragility. Nights when Mr. Ellison would stare into the distance, haunted by memories of humiliation, poverty, and societal neglect. During one particularly quiet night, Marcus asked, "Do you ever feel hopeless?" Mr. Ellison's eyes reflected the city lights. "Every day," he admitted softly. "But hope isn't a constant. It's fragile, and sometimes it must be rebuilt, brick by brick, by someone willing to believe in you even when the world doesn't." Marcus nodded. "Then we'll rebuild it. Together." It was not easy. There were setbacks, calls that reminded them of bureaucratic obstacles, lingering fear of the world's judgment, moments when the past threatened to consume the present. But each time, they rose together. Each time, Marcus reminded Mr. Ellison of his worth, of his dignity, of the life he had earned but been denied. Through these trials, Marcus began to understand the deeper truth of his journey. Success, money, influence, they were hollow if they could not be used to restore humanity. The world had taught Mr. Ellison lessons in cruelty and neglect, but Marcus now understood that he could teach the world the lesson it had forgotten, that compassion, courage, and recognition of human dignity were the greatest forms of power. And in those moments, quiet, steady, persistent, they discovered something extraordinary. Not just redemption, not just healing, but a bond that transcended years, social expectations, and the pain of the world. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a fragile rhythm. Marcus and Mr. Ellison had carved out routines, rebuilt connections, and rediscovered fragments of hope. But the world, as always, had its own plans. It came in the form of an invitation, one Marcus could not ignore: a gala celebrating the city's top philanthropists. It was the kind of event that commanded attention, where influence and wealth were measured by appearances, smiles, and handshakes. Marcus had attended countless events like this, but this one carried a different weight. He turned to Mr. Ellison that morning, hesitant. "I want you to come with me," he said. "Not for me, but for yourself. People should see the man who changed my life." Mr. Ellison's reaction was cautious. "The world doesn't like men like me," he said quietly. "It applauds success, not struggle. It sees the past as a weakness, not a story worth hearing." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll show them what strength really is." The night of the gala arrived. The city glittered below them, lights reflecting against sleek glass towers, like stars trapped in the concrete sky. Marcus wore a tailored suit, his usual armor of confidence, while Mr. Ellison, in a simple, well-fitted jacket, carried the quiet dignity of a man who had survived life's harshest trials. At first, the event was a spectacle of glimmering smiles, polite applause, and shallow conversations. Whispers followed them almost immediately. Some were admiring, others suspicious, questioning Marcus's motives. Why is he here? A homeless man at a gala? But Marcus ignored them. He guided Mr. Ellison through the crowd, introducing him to a few close allies. "This is the man who shaped my life," he said proudly. "Without him, I wouldn't be standing here tonight." For a moment, a hush fell. People looked, some curious, some uncomfortable, all aware that Marcus was breaking the rules of their world. And then came the first test. A prominent philanthropist approached, a woman known for her sharp judgment and relentless gossip. She smiled, but there was an edge in her tone. "Marcus, this is unexpected. I wasn't aware you were bringing guests from unusual backgrounds." Mr. Ellison stiffened, but Marcus spoke firmly. "He is not a guest of charity. He is my teacher, my mentor, and the man who changed the course of my life. Respect is owed, not granted." The woman blinked, caught off guard by Marcus's confidence. "Ah, I see. How admirable." Yet, beneath the surface, judgment simmered. Conversations paused, glances lingered. It was a world accustomed to appearances, not authenticity. And in that environment, Mr. Ellison felt vulnerable, exposed in ways he had spent decades avoiding. Later, as the evening continued, Mr. Ellison found himself cornered by questions about his past, his homelessness, his life on the streets. Some were well-meaning, others veiled accusations. He faltered, and Marcus noticed immediately. Pulling him aside, he whispered, "Ignore them. You're here because of your worth, not their approval." Mr. Ellison took a deep breath. Slowly, carefully, he straightened, meeting the eyes of those who doubted him. "I survived," he said, voice steady, carrying the weight of decades. "I survived because I believed in people, even when the world turned against me. And tonight, I stand not for pity, but for dignity." Silence fell. Even the critics paused, sensing the quiet power in his words. Marcus felt a swell of pride, not just in Mr. Ellison, but in the bond they had forged, the trust, the courage, the resilience that neither wealth nor status could manufacture. The evening ended with quiet victories, reconnections, acknowledgments, and subtle shifts in perception. Some guests approached to express genuine respect. Some even confessed regret for judging too quickly. And through it all, Marcus realized that this display of authenticity and courage was more important than any business deal, any headline, any accolade. But the night also brought an internal reckoning. Mr. Ellison, alone in their car afterward, spoke softly, voice tinged with fatigue and vulnerability. "The world, it still doesn't understand. And I worry I may never fit." Marcus squeezed his hand gently. "You do fit," he said. "Not because they see you, but because I do. And because you matter. That's enough." In that moment, Marcus understood the full magnitude of their journey. This was more than redemption or rescue. It was about facing the world with truth, about asserting humanity in a society that often forgot its value, and about trusting in bonds stronger than fear or judgment. As the city lights faded behind them, Marcus felt the quiet resolve settle in his chest. There would be more tests, more judgment, more challenges. But he knew now that neither money, nor influence, nor societal expectation could define their path. They would define it themselves with courage, with dignity, and with unwavering trust in each other. The night of the gala left echoes that neither Marcus nor Mr. Ellison could ignore. What should have been a quiet triumph, a testament to dignity, trust, and courage, became the spark that lit the shadows of the past. The following days were tense. Messages arrived at Marcus's office, some congratulatory, but many tinged with criticism or thinly veiled condescension. "Are you using this man to polish your image?" one read. "Wealth cannot buy morality," said another. Headlines quietly suggested eccentricity, painting Marcus as an indulgent millionaire with questionable motives. Marcus ignored most of it publicly, but privately, the whispers gnawed at him. Not for his sake, but for Mr. Ellison. He feared the world's judgment might break the quiet progress they had begun to rebuild. Meanwhile, Mr. Ellison wrestled with memories long buried. The streets had been cruel, but they had also been a mirror reflecting the injustices and racism he had endured throughout his life. He had faced humiliation, systemic neglect, and indifference from the very society that now scrutinized him for accepting kindness. Each whispered comment, each skeptical glance, reminded him of years when no one cared enough to notice. One afternoon, Marcus found him standing by the window, staring at the streets below. His expression was distant, haunted. "They're judging us," Mr. Ellison said softly, voice trembling. "Not just the world, Marcus, but themselves. They see wealth, power, comfort, and they assume everything else is less." Marcus approached, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "They are afraid of truth," he said. "They are afraid of what they don't understand. But you've survived worse than whispers. You are stronger than their judgment." Mr. Ellison shook his head. "It's not just fear. It's the history I carry. The times I was dismissed, denied, overlooked because of my skin, because of who I was, because the world didn't think I mattered." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. He realized that no amount of money or influence could erase decades of oppression, neglect, and injustice. These were scars written not in ink, but in the very soul. Determined to support him, Marcus devised a plan, an attempt to reclaim Mr. Ellison's voice, to confront the shadows of a society that had ignored him for too long. He arranged meetings with former students, city officials, and journalists, people who could witness Mr. Ellison's life, hear his story, and acknowledge the dignity that had survived despite neglect. The first meeting was small, a modest gathering of those who had once been taught or mentored by him. The room was quiet at first, tension hanging like a heavy curtain. Then Mr. Ellison began to speak. "I survived because of hope," he said, voice steady now, carrying the weight of experience. "Not because anyone else believed I could, but because I refused to stop believing in others. I may have walked streets where no one saw me, where my dignity was tested daily, but I never let the world define my worth. I am here because I endured. I am here because I mattered. And I hope you remember that none of us are invisible." The room was silent. Tears formed in eyes that had long forgotten gratitude. Words that had been lost in the corridors of time were now being heard. Recognition, respect, and the quiet power of survival filled the space. But not everyone welcomed it. News outlets picked up snippets of the gathering and twisted them into stories questioning Marcus's motives. Social media buzzed with speculation, judgment, and veiled mockery. Marcus felt the sting, yet he refused to back down. He knew the path to redemption and to healing was never free of challenge. That evening, back in the quiet of their penthouse, Marcus watched Mr. Ellison settle into a worn armchair, a glass of tea warming his hands. The old man's eyes reflected fatigue, but also something Marcus had not seen in years: quiet pride. "You faced them," Marcus said softly. "All of it. And you did not falter." Mr. Ellison nodded, voice low but steady. "I may falter, I may doubt, but there is strength in being seen, Marcus. Even now, after everything, being seen matters." Marcus realized that this was the next stage of their journey. Survival had been one thing. Healing, acknowledgement, and reclaiming dignity in a world that rarely forgave, this was another battle entirely. And yet, he understood. The past, no matter how dark, could never define the present if courage and compassion guided the way. As night settled over the city, rain pattering softly against the glass, Marcus and Mr. Ellison sat together, silent, connected by trust, respect, and the unspoken understanding that life's greatest challenges were not only external, They were the shadows of the past, waiting to test the strength of those who dared to rise above. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Marcus felt a deep truth settle within him. The journey was far from over. The world would continue to judge, to test, and to challenge them. But together, they were no longer defined by the shadows, they were defined by their resilience, their courage, and the unwavering bond between a teacher and a student who had found each other again. Life, Marcus realized, does not allow redemption without reckoning. Healing, he had begun to understand, was not a straight path, nor was it free of shadows. It demanded confrontation not just with the world, but with the ghosts that had lingered in the corners of memory for decades. For Mr. Ellison, that reckoning came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as they walked through a neighborhood that Marcus had insisted Mr. Ellison revisit. "It's part of your story," he had said. "You can't erase it, and you don't need to." A familiar face emerged from the crowd. At first, Mr. Ellison froze, uncertainty and fear rippling across his features. It was a former neighbor, a man he had once trusted, who had turned away in a time of need, leaving Mr. Ellison to endure hardships alone. The sight of him stirred memories of betrayal, abandonment, and a lifetime of injustice that had shaped him into the man Marcus now admired. "You," Mr. Ellison whispered, voice tight, a mixture of anger and disbelief. The man looked away, uncomfortable, shame flickering in his eyes. "Ellison, I didn't know. I'm sorry," he said softly, as if words alone could erase the decades of neglect. Mr. Ellison's fists clenched. Anger, hurt, and unresolved pain surged within him. "You didn't know?" he said, voice low but edged with steel. "You abandoned me when the world already had. You left me to survive alone, and now you have the nerve to say sorry?" Marcus stepped beside him, hand on Mr. Ellison's shoulder, grounding him. "You have a choice," Marcus said gently. "This is your moment. Do you let this wound control you, or do you reclaim your power?" The old man's eyes, brimming with decades of memory, locked onto the face of the man who had once hurt him. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then Mr. Ellison inhaled deeply, the first flicker of calm breaking through the storm within. "I survived," he said finally, voice steady, carrying the weight of every hardship endured. "I survived without you, without anyone who should have cared, and I am still here." The words were not forgiveness, they were a declaration of strength, a reclaiming of dignity. Marcus felt a swell of pride and sorrow in equal measure. This was the core of resilience, facing those who had harmed you, standing tall, and refusing to be diminished by the world's failures. The man before him nodded, uncertain, aware that no apology could undo the past. I'm truly sorry," he whispered again. Mr. Ellison did not respond. He turned away, shoulders straight, steps deliberate. Marcus walked beside him in silence, feeling the magnitude of what had just occurred. This confrontation was more than a meeting, it was a ritual of acknowledgement. Mr. Ellison had faced the embodiment of his past pain, and rather than crumble, he reclaimed his agency, his dignity, his power. Later that evening, back in the sanctuary of the penthouse, Marcus and Mr. Ellison sat quietly. The city outside shimmered with neon lights, oblivious to the battles fought within walls of memory and resilience. "You were amazing," Marcus said softly. "Most people, they would have crumbled." Mr. Ellison shook his head slowly. "No, Marcus. This is life. Life doesn't give you the choice to crumble or not. It gives you the chance to face it. And today, I chose to face it." Marcus realized, in that quiet moment, the depth of what mentorship had meant, not just the lessons learned in a classroom, but the lifelong imprint of courage, resilience, and moral strength. He understood that his role in Mr. Ellison's life was not to erase the past, but to stand beside him as he reclaimed it. And in that understanding, Marcus found a truth he could never have discovered in boardrooms or balance sheets. True leadership, true power, and true love are measured not by what you accumulate, but by who you help rise, and by how courageously you face the shadows of a life lived. The night drew on, quiet and reflective. Rain tapped softly against the windows, a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of lives rebuilt, memories reconciled, and wounds finally acknowledged. Marcus knew the journey ahead was still long. Society's judgment, systemic injustice, and hidden scars would continue to challenge them, but for the first time, he believed that healing was possible, even against the weight of decades. And in the silence, Marcus and Mr. Ellison sat together, not just teacher and student, but survivors, allies, and witnesses to the power of confronting the past and choosing to rise above it. Redemption, Marcus realized, was never just a private endeavor. It was a battle against a world that often thrived on neglect, injustice, and the quiet erasure of those it deemed unworthy. And for Mr. Ellison, this world was not kind. Weeks after confronting his past, they encountered the first real systemic obstacle. A public initiative. Marcus had planned a program to reintroduce Mr. Ellison into community leadership and mentorship hit a wall. Paperwork, bureaucracy, and endless regulations blocked every step forward. Permits were delayed, approvals denied, and every small victory seemed to be countered by layers of obstruction, invisible but powerful. Marcus had faced corporate battles before, negotiations with hostile executives and legal hurdles, but this felt different. These obstacles weren't motivated by greed, they were motivated by indifference, by a system that did not prioritize humanity, and sometimes, Marcus realized bitterly, by subtle prejudice. Why does it have to be this hard? Mr. Ellison asked one afternoon, frustration flickering in his eyes. I've spent my life helping others, giving everything I had, and now, to reclaim a little place in the world, I face walls built by people who don't even know me? Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw tight. It's not personal, he said, but it is real. Systems are designed to protect themselves, not people, but we will push through it. Every layer, every obstacle, we'll face it together. The first challenge was the housing permit for a community mentorship center Marcus had arranged for Mr. Ellison. Documents piled up, questions from city officials stretched endlessly, and procedural delays threatened to stall the initiative indefinitely. Marcus spent hours in offices, navigating bureaucracy with patience he didn't know he possessed, while Mr. Ellison observed quietly, a mixture of skepticism and hope in his eyes. You're doing it, Mr. Ellison said one evening, as they left a government office, rain dripping from their coats. You're moving the world for me, and it scares me how much I need this. Marcus smiled faintly, though exhaustion shadowed his expression. It scares me too, he admitted. But sometimes, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about moving forward anyway. Slowly, victory arrived. A handwritten note, an email, a small bureaucratic oversight corrected the first approval came through. Mr. Ellison's eyes glistened. It's happening, he whispered. After all these years, it's really happening. But the system had more tests in store. Media scrutiny, subtle discrimination, and old prejudices began to surface, questioning whether a man like Mr. Ellison, once homeless, once invisible, was fit to lead, teach, or inspire. Interviews became a delicate dance, every word parsed, every action scrutinized. Marcus shielded him as best he could, but the old wounds, those decades of neglect and racism, flickered painfully in Mr. Ellison's eyes. One day, a reporter asked pointedly, "Do you think someone who has lived on the streets can truly lead or teach young people? Isn't it risky?" Mr. Ellison's expression hardened, the weight of years etched into his face. Slowly, deliberately, he looked directly at the camera. I have survived life's harshest lessons. I have endured neglect, injustice, and indifference. And yet, here I stand. Not broken, not diminished, but stronger. Strength is not measured by where you start, it is measured by how you rise after the world has tried to erase you. The reporter faltered, caught off guard by the quiet power in those words. Marcus watched, pride and awe mingling in his chest. This was more than a battle against bureaucracy. It was a battle for respect, recognition, and the acknowledgement that humanity mattered more than protocol. That night, as rain fell softly against the penthouse windows, Marcus and Mr. Ellison reflected on the day's victories and losses. The system, Marcus said softly, it isn't built for people like you. It's built for rules, for red tape. But we're showing it that people come first. Mr. Ellison nodded slowly. And every time we push, every time we assert our worth, we change it, not just for me, but for everyone who comes after. This is what matters. Marcus understood then that their journey was no longer just personal. It had become a fight for justice, for dignity, for the acknowledgement of those the world had long forgotten. Every small victory in bureaucracy, every acknowledgement of value, was a step toward reshaping the narrative, proving that life's worth could not be measured by privilege, wealth, or societal status alone. And as the city lights glimmered beneath them, Marcus and Mr. Ellison sat together quietly, resolved to face every challenge, every wall, every shadow that life and society threw in their path, because they had survived worse. And together, there was nothing they could not endure. After months of struggle, navigating bureaucracy, confronting prejudice, and wrestling with ghosts of the past, Marcus and Mr. Ellison finally stood at the threshold of their first tangible triumph. The opening of the Community Mentorship Center. The building itself was modest, a renovated space tucked between aging brick facades. But to Marcus and Mr. Ellison, it symbolized so much more. It was a testament to resilience, a sanctuary for those society often ignored, and a tangible marker of dignity reclaimed. On the morning of the opening, Marcus watched as Mr. Ellison prepared quietly. There was a nervous energy about him, a mixture of anticipation, pride, and the lingering shadows of self-doubt. The old man, once invisible to the world, now carried the weight of attention, the hope of students, and the scrutiny of society itself. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Mr. Ellison paused, adjusting his tie, his hands trembling ever so slightly. "I think I've been ready my whole life," he replied softly. "I just didn't know it until now." The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a small crowd. Former students, local community leaders, journalists, and a handful of curious neighbors. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, and whispers circled the room. The air was thick with expectation. Marcus leaned in, whispering to Mr. Ellison, "This isn't just about you. It's about every person who's ever been overlooked, every voice that's been silenced. You are their proof." Mr. Ellison nodded, drawing a deep breath. He stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice, initially soft, gained strength as he spoke. "I stand here today, not because of wealth or influence or privilege, but because of resilience, hope, and the courage to believe in humanity. For decades, I was invisible. I was overlooked. But today, I reclaim not just my dignity, but the dignity of everyone who has been forgotten, ignored, or dismissed." Silence fell. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. Hesitant at first, then swelling into genuine recognition. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. This acknowledgement was more powerful than any boardroom victory, any business acquisition, any accolade he had ever achieved. The first group of students arrived shortly after. Young faces, curious and cautious, mirrored the uncertainty Mr. Ellison had once seen in the classrooms of his past. Marcus watched as the old teacher interacted with them, guiding, mentoring, inspiring, and quietly leaving an imprint of hope that years of hardship had never allowed him to express fully. One student, a young girl with eyes full of fear and determination, approached Mr. Ellison. I didn't think anyone would care about me," she whispered. Mr. Ellison knelt, meeting her gaze. "I care," he said simply, "and I always will. You are not invisible. You are seen, and I will do everything I can to help you rise." Marcus observed quietly from the side, a mixture of pride and humility filling his chest. This was the moment he had envisioned, not the glimmer of media attention, not the praise of society, but the quiet impact of one man making a difference in the life of another. Yet, amidst the triumph, shadows lingered. A few journalists, still skeptical, whispered questions about the sustainability of the program. Neighbors cast glances of curiosity tinged with doubt, and Marcus knew, even in this moment of victory, that challenges were far from over. The system, the world, and even the lingering doubts within Mr. Ellison would continue to test their resolve. But for now, they allowed themselves to breathe, to savor the victory, to witness hope taking root in the faces of children and young adults who, like Marcus once did, had dreamed quietly, unsure if anyone would ever believe in them. That evening, as Marcus and Mr. Ellison returned to the penthouse, the city skyline glowing like a sea of possibilities, Marcus reflected on the journey thus far. From the streets to the penthouse, from despair to hope, they had faced judgment, prejudice, and systemic barriers and emerged stronger. Mr. Ellison, gazing out at the lights, spoke softly, This is only the beginning, but it feels like a start worth fighting for." Marcus nodded, understanding fully. "It is, and together, we'll face whatever comes next. For the students, for each other, and for every life that has been overlooked." In the quiet of the night, with rain softly pattering against the window, Marcus realized that true success was measured not in wealth or status, but in courage, compassion, and the ability to restore hope where it had been lost. And in that realization, he felt the first stirring of a profound truth. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, they were truly ready for the battles ahead. Years had passed since that first day Marcus had found Mr. Ellison on the streets. Years marked by struggle, healing, triumph, and relentless perseverance. And now, as they stood together in the courtyard of the thriving mentorship center, the full weight of their journey pressed upon them not as a burden, but as a testament to resilience. The center had grown beyond their initial expectations. Former students had returned as volunteers. Classrooms were filled with laughter and learning, and a small community had formed around the idea that no life was invisible, no voice meaningless. Marcus had poured his resources into the vision, but the true heart of the work was Mr. Ellison, whose wisdom, patience, and unshakable humanity had inspired every soul who crossed the threshold. On this particular day, Marcus watched Mr. Ellison addressing a group of new students, his voice carrying the same quiet power that had once shaped Marcus himself. He spoke of hope, of courage, of facing the world even when it seemed indifferent. He spoke of dignity, of resilience, and of the unyielding strength that comes from surviving and rising above life's cruelties. A young boy raised his hand, eyes wide with curiosity. "Mr. Ellison," he asked, "do you really think someone like me can change the world?" Mr. Ellison paused, letting the words sink in. Then, with a gentle smile that spoke of decades of experience, he said, "Not just someone like you, but you. Every life has power, every voice has weight, and the world will notice, not always today, not always tomorrow, but eventually. And when it does, it will be because you refused to remain silent, invisible, or forgotten." Marcus stepped back, quietly watching the scene unfold. Pride welled in his chest, not the shallow pride of wealth or power, but a deeper, more profound pride. The pride of knowing that someone he had once called a teacher, once a mentor, had reclaimed his life and, in doing so, was changing the lives of countless others. Later, as the day drew to a close, Marcus and Mr. Ellison sat together on a bench overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting, bathing the streets below in gold and amber, a quiet reflection of the hope they had fought to restore. "You've done more than I could ever imagine," Marcus said softly. "Not just for me, but for everyone here." Mr. Ellison looked at him, eyes glistening. "And you've done the same for me," he replied. "You reminded me that life is not only about survival, it's about connection, about compassion, about standing for what's right even when the world doesn't notice." Marcus nodded, the weight of the journey settling over him. "We've both learned that, haven't we? That healing isn't linear, that redemption isn't given, it's reclaimed, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can echo far beyond what we can see." Mr. Ellison smiled faintly, the same quiet, knowing smile that had once guided Marcus as a boy. "Yes, and that the world is always worth fighting for, one life at a time." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the city alive around them, the soft hum of distant traffic, children's laughter from the center, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. In that silence, a profound understanding passed between them. They had transformed despair into hope, judgment into acknowledgement, and invisibility into legacy. As night fell, Marcus reflected on the journey they had taken together, from the streets to the penthouse, from neglect to recognition, from hopelessness to empowerment. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks, betrayals, judgment, and pain. But through every challenge, they had persevered, together. And now, at last, the world could see what he had always known, that true wealth lies not in money, but in the lives we touch. That true power lies not in status, but in compassion. And that true legacy lies not in what we leave behind, but in what we restore to others. Marcus turned to Mr. Ellison, voice quiet but firm. We've changed the world, not all at once, but in ways that matter. And it will continue to change, because of you, because of all the lives you've touched, and because of the courage we've both learned to hold. Mr. Ellison placed a hand on Marcus's, steady and warm. And it will continue, Marcus, long after we're gone. That is the true meaning of hope. The camera, or in narration, the listener's mind lingers on that moment. Two men, different generations, bound by respect, resilience, and love, silhouetted against the city skyline, the last rays of sunlight reflecting off glass towers and streets below.